Hello, 8th grade artists. So this is going to be sort of the beginning of the enlargement process of my candy wrapper. So as you can see, I've got my example in front of me, ready to go. I would prefer to work from a printed copy of this, as might some of you, but right now I do not have the printed copies yet, so I will be working from my computer screen, but you will have the option of whether you choose to work on the computer screen or working from the paper copy. So now I've got my grid here. It matches the grid on my computer. So the first thing that I want to do is go ahead and start with my largest shapes first. So I would be starting with the person's face and that sort of cloud that marks as their hair and the space behind the word forehead. And I would also do that little number 2 that's down here towards the bottom. So the first thing I'm going to do is just start here, and I'm going to just very lightly draw in what I see and where I see it. So what I mean by that is you want to pay a lot of attention to where things fall within each square. And you want to draw very, very lightly, because at this point I know that a lot of this is going to get erased. So this is just kind of a loose example of where everything needs to be. And once again, you want to pay attention to where things fall within the square. So if it's halfway in the square, if it's smack in the middle of the square, if it sort of is on one of the lines. So use the grid lines, use the squares to help you make sure that you're making things as accurate as you can. And I'll talk a lot more about that as I go throughout. Right now, I'm just getting kind of a loose example of where things go in terms of those larger shapes. And then what I'll do is go back through everything that I've already drawn and just make sure that it's accurate before I move on. So basically, this type of a thing is going to happen in layers and phases, to where you're going to do sort of a guess almost of where everything is, and then you're going to double check everything, you're going to make corrections, and then you're going to be moving forward once you've made sure that things are as accurate as you can get them. You don't want to move ahead too quickly. You do not want to try to finish any one spot on its own. One of the most important things is that you want to make sure that you develop the entire thing kind of as a unit rather than all as individual parts and pieces. So I don't necessarily want to finish this section before I finish the rest of it. I want to kind of work on the whole bigger shapes and then the whole smaller shapes. So I'm going to get the outline of the face and the outline of the hair and the number 2 as correct as possible. And then I'll move into the face itself, get that as correct as possible, and then the words that go up here, and get that as correct as possible, and then double check everything once more before I move into any sort of outlining. So now I'm just going to go up here to the top to put in sort of the top of that cloudy area. It goes almost to the top here and then comes down, comes across into the next square. It's about halfway. And then this loop is almost taking up that whole bottom half of that square. Comes down into the next square a little bit and then goes out. Again, it's about the halfway point, and then it comes across. Comes out here, and then this loop is kind of is centered on this line almost. And then part of my S is on the outside here, so I'm going to go ahead and draw that curve. But then the rest of it is the cloud and the outline of the head. And then I'm going to move on to the number 2 here. It starts in this square, the very bottom edge is about halfway across, and then comes up, and then goes down at a slight angle here, and then about right here, so is where it starts to dip down, and then comes to about the halfway point of this square, pretty close to this line, and then it comes out, and almost comes to the bottom, and then comes across, almost level with this part, and then this curves all the way back into this square, comes up just a little bit, barely touches into the top section here, and then comes across. So I know that that too is not completely accurate yet, but I'm not too concerned about that, because now my next step is going to be to look at the face, the cloud, and the two, and make sure that those initial lines are as accurate as I can get them. So I'm going to get sort of that outline as accurate as I can, and then I'm going to add sort of the thickness where it needs to be, because if I look at my example, there's sort of a thick black outline around the face and around the cloud, but it gets thicker and thinner in certain places. So I want to make sure the mine does as well. So once again, I'm just going to start with the cheek here. Just going to make sure I've got the general outline as accurate as I can. So this actually doesn't come quite that far over. So one thing I want to point out is do not erase things until after you have made any correction. So right there I had part of the face wrong, but I did not want to erase it until I made the correct line, because otherwise you're risking making the exact same mistake. I'm going to move on to this side and start on the face over here. So the ear is just a little higher up than I have it. Comes a bit more to a point here, and then comes down a little bit more, and then over behind the cheek. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the sort of cloudy space here. So this needs to come back to the left a little bit more. And then the next one comes down and then curls up. And then they sort of come to a point right about here on this vertical line. And then this section is a little smaller than what I've got, which then also means that this next one is a little bit larger. And then this one comes down and then comes over quite a bit. And then this one actually comes back and touches that vertical line. Doesn't go quite that far to the right. And then this comes down. And then it comes over into that S. And I'm not going to worry too much about the S itself yet, but I do want to get that sort of outer curve of it correct here. And this is going to be a bit higher up than what I've got it. So do not worry about making mistakes and having to fix them at this step. That is exactly what this step is for. It is one of the most important steps, but it can also be a pretty frustrating step because you are literally looking for everything that you've done wrong and need to fix. But you've got to take the time to make those corrections, or else it will not be as accurate as it could be. So turn the page whatever direction and angle you need. Redraw as much as you need. Make sure you draw nice and light. And really force yourself to make those changes. That's why we're spending quite a bit of class time on this, because it can get a little frustrating. This actually goes off the page here. We're going to bring that up and off. And then this comes back down and goes over. So now I've got the cloudy area and the face pretty accurate. So my next step is going to be to do the same thing on the number 2. And then I'm going to go back into the outline of the face and the cloudy area to make sure that I get the thickness and thinness of those outlines accurate. Not just the placement of them, but the actual thickness of them. So I'm going to go ahead and touch up my 2 here. Comes down a little more. And this is a little bit more round than what I've got it. And not quite so low on that curve. So as you can see, this line and this line are already more parallel. That has a bit more of a curve to it than what I had. Comes down a smidge further. It actually comes out just a little further too, more to right about here. So it's more like that. And then this comes up just a little bit. Again, kind of in a diagonal line here. And then comes across here. So that this kind of creates its own line. And I could definitely use a ruler, and I would actually recommend using a ruler, especially on the outlining step, to get these straight lines on the bottom of the 2 as accurate as possible. But now I've got everything drawn pretty accurately. So in the next video, I'm just going to show you guys adding some of the thickness and the width to the outlined portions of the face, the hair, and the number 2.